Thank you very much. Perfect. So my goal here is to give you an idea what it means to do deception in cybersecurity. And kind of stepping back from all the tools, all the techniques, all the technical details, but understanding what it means, what is deception? How do we apply something that is so abstract, so generic as deception is? So let me get started with a little bit details about myself. I'm a software engineer, so I like solving problems, I like building tools. And about 9 years ago, I started getting involved in the Honeynet Project by just building honeypots. I was a student, I participated in Google Summer of Code, which we choose later. So I get just involved by giving back, giving something to the community, making my tools open source, making it possible for other people to experience the fun I had with setting up traps for bad guys. So I'm an engineer, I build stuff in my work day and also a little bit in my free time. I slowly moved into more like a helping and teaching and mentoring role these days, but I still enjoy building tools. So if you are using some of the Honeynet Project tools, you probably have stumbled over some of I built. I'm German, so if there's anything unclear about my language, how I pronounce English, just raise your hand, ask questions, slow me down. I'm living these days in Denmark. So the other day I was talking to someone from Melbourne, and she was telling me, hey, this is like not a big city, there's not much to see. I asked, how many people live here? She's like, yeah, like 4 million-ish. Like, that's about the population of Denmark. Like, it's a small country up in north, it's very cold. So it's a nice vacation for me here, getting some sun, getting some tanning done down here. So, talking about deception is quite, it's difficult. So, and I try to put this in simple words, and I try to make nice slides with lots of different pictures and graphs, and in the end, it was not really satisfactory for me. Like, how do I tell you people what it means to do deception? So I decided to do a couple of stories, so a couple of things that I've experienced to kind of bring you a bit closer to what deception means, how you can apply it in the cyber. So the first problem that arises when you talk about deception is what we call the first rule of deception, is that you don't talk about deception, and this makes a lot of sense, right? I mean, you shouldn't tell the bad guys how you deceive them. You shouldn't make your stuff open source. You shouldn't write papers. You shouldn't write, put your stuff out there. Like, it is the worst thing you can do if you want to deceive someone. So I'm basically done, right? I cannot talk about the stuff we do. But then on the other side, we want to teach you guys. We want to let you benefit from the experience we have collected. From the almost 20 years now of us collecting data, understanding the bad guys. So it's a bit of a trade-off. I mean, we have to share at one point in order to let other people know, to let other people benefit, but on the other side, we know the bad guys are listening as well. I've set up a couple of honeypots and shared the data, how I built those honeypots, and people were writing me, hey, I found your honeypots. Like, yeah, sure. I mean, it's not that difficult. You just look at the source code, you look at the information that you have to look for. Like, it's very simple if you have the source code, if everything is basically there to find me. But it's always a trade-off, and I mean, I enjoy the challenge. I can still change my honeypots in a way they're a bit more disguised. So it is a trade-off, so I keep talking. I'm not done with my presentation yet. So deception can be very easily deployed, and actually it is extremely simple if you think about it. So one of the easiest ways to do deception is by just adding some extra data which is not relevant. Let me explain what that means. Let's say you have a database of credit card information from your customers, which is very common, and we all heard about all those breaches where databases of user credentials and credit cards were leaked. So what if you add another 1,000, 2,000% of extra credit card information to your database? So if someone pops your database, they got another 2,000, 3,000% of extra credit card information, which is completely useless. And if you have been in that field of credit card buying and selling, you know that they have to verify the value of a data set is based on how many of those credit cards are actually valid and working. So they have to validate every single credit card to make sure that they only sell working ones. So by this way, you make it just expensive for the bad guys. They have to invest time, they have to invest resources to make sure that all the credit cards they stole is actually valid data. So this is very simple. I mean, this is not how you should protect your credit card information, but it is a way of how to make deception work in this way. You could also do this with user accounts. Just add another 5 billion user accounts to your database. If someone pops your database, you get like maybe your 5 users and 5 million of fake users. So how do they know which of the encrypted passwords they should decrypt? So they spend a lot of time decrypting all those passwords, and all of them decrypt to 1123 honeypot here. So it is not as far away as it seems. Like deception can be done really, really simple. So, but deception is not about just putting fake data out there. Deception is also about baiting people. This sounds a bit weird, and it's actually one of the things we struggled a lot with. That people said, "Wait, you're putting like broken stuff out there, and you're luring people in, and you attract them to your system. Like this sounds really, really bad. I don't want anyone to see me. Like this is the worst." Yes, there's a balance. I mean, me as myself as a researcher, my highest goal is to get as many bad guys to my system as possible, which is the complete opposite if you want to protect the system. So one of the things that we deploy is something called baits. There's many different words for it, but I use baits. So baits is basically small bits of pieces of things. Let's keep it very generic. Things that might people be interested in, they touch it, and we use some techniques in the background to notify us, okay, someone just touched this piece of information. This could be a credit card information. This could be a credit card number. We put out a credit card number which is completely fake, completely made up, and if someone uses it, we know someone got into my system and stole this specific credit card because it's linked to a system that notifies me. So if someone ever uses that specific credit card, which is only in my database, nobody has access to this credit card information. If someone uses this specific number, I know my database got breached. This is very simple. This is very effective. So you have a security incident. How does that play out? So usually you have those 4 stages of security incident. And I want to first start with the detection part, because this is basically what we do with honeypots. We detect things. We see things. So detection means you get notified about something. You get events, you get information, which is super important. I don't know if you guys have a rough feeling what changed in the last 10, 15 years in the AV space, the antivirus space. Not much. I mean, all AV engines still work the same way. The patterns still work the same way. Like, there's not a big change. But what has changed is that we detect stuff and we propagate that information. So if someone gets breached over there, we can use that information. We can use the information that we collected and protect other people's over there. This is a big change. I mean, it might be not as obvious to you as end users, as people who just use those products, but this was a big change. So detection, this is one of the most important things. If you don't know what's happening, if you don't know that you're breached, if you don't know that someone is inside your system, you basically know nothing. You're Jon Snow. So basically detecting, knowing what's going on is how you protect yourself. You cannot protect yourself if you don't know what's happening. You probably protect against the wrong things. You probably protect against something someone told you at a conference 2 years ago. But if you know what the threat is out there, then you know how to protect it. So the next step is, so you know what's happening, you know people trying to break in, you have to resist against them. And actually this is one of the most fun things in Honeynet. The most fun things when you build up traps, because you can make those people suffer. And this is one of the most important things for me as a researcher. I like to make people suffer, especially bad guys. So suffering means very technically that you set up carpets. Carpets basically means I make it really expensive, really resource hungry for you to get into my system, to understand my system. It takes forever to load this website, or maybe half of the time the website breaks. So they spend time on my system. They spend time on my honeypots. They spend time on a system I don't care about because it is my honeypot. And this time spent is not spent on breaking my production system. This is very important because this gives you time to protect, this gives you time to react, this gives you time to filter the events that you get out of your IDS, firewalls, whatever, to understand that someone is trying to break into your system. This gives you an advantage in your fight against the bad guys. Responding is the next level. So how do you use the information that you have collected? how do you use the information that you got from someone trying to break in to protect yourself against in the future attacks. So this means using, understanding the enemies. This is basically the biggest mission we always had in Honeynet Project. If you understand your enemy, if you understand what they're trying to do, what their motives are, what their modus operandi is, then you know how to protect yourself properly. So I had to bring up this guy. He comes up in every Honeynet slide, more or less. So thus the expert in fact moves the enemy and is not moved by him. And this basically means, like, don't be in this passive, being hammered by attacks kind of position. Fight back, not in a active, reaching out, punching back way, but just make it difficult for the bad guys, make it hard. Use the resources you have, use the abilities to make things slow, make things complicated, make things really expensive for the bad guys. So what does it mean? We now collect this information as a security researcher, we understand the bad guys, we get their IP addresses, can we arrest them? I've tried this. Back in the days when I started building honeypots, I built website application honeypots. I found a lot of broken-in websites. I wrote people, hey, your website got hacked. I don't know how many emails, hundreds of emails I've sent out from my Gmail account, and surprisingly, I never got any responses back. Literally hundreds of emails telling people, this is the path, this is the file on your system, you got breached, someone is using your system for command and control. One guy from Canada wrote back, hey Lucas, thank you so much, can I give you something back? I said, yeah, send me a beer. He sent me 10 Canadian dollars. This was the only time I got something back, which was awesome. Back in the days, I felt like I saved the world. But we can actually do more. I mean, we can use that information, we can share the information, which is very important. I mean, these days, if you are working in security, it's all about sharing. You share your indicators, you share the information that you got breached. Sometimes you have to share these days. You're required by law. If you're not sharing information about you being breached, you're violating the law and you have to pay ridiculous fees these days. So yes, we can do something about it. We can react, we can protect ourselves by fighting back on a legal field. So this kind of leads in what we do as security researchers in the honeypot field. And I want to make this a little bit more scientific by using formulas and equal signs, because it's university here. So just to explain roughly what this means is, security risk is something we're all quite familiar with. And as a security researcher building honeypots, I want to increase my security risk. I want to have people attacking me, I want to understand them. So in my case, it means I have to increase the likelihood of a successful attack, which is something you usually try to decrease. This is really bad. I want to decrease it, but I want to increase it. So when I build honeypots, I want to make them juicy. I want to make them look vulnerable. I want to make them discoverable by the bad guys. So the only thing I actually control in the bottom part of the equation is I cannot control the threat. Those are the bad guys out there. I cannot influence them. I can influence them a little bit, but they are there. I can increase the number of vulnerabilities that I'm offering in my honeypot, and I can increase the target attractiveness by just putting my honeypot on a public IP address. Very simple. I will come back to this later. So the technologies we use for deception, very simple, very traditionally, it started with servers. We just set up a server. We open SSH, we put up an easy password to guess and let people in. But over the times this evolved. We did not want to just sit there and wait for bad guys. So we came up with this, this technology called client-side honeypots. So instead of just waiting there and sitting there, we started reaching out. We started to visit websites, compromised websites that tried to compromise us. So we understood what are the usual ways how clients, how normal users get infected, which is by infected websites, by websites serving exploits. We also use spam, we collected spam, like the most common ways these days how people get infected, spear phishing. Infected attachments is still happening after, I don't know, 20, 30 years. Tokens are what I called earlier baits, so the small pieces of information that lie around, and if you touch them, you trigger an alert. There's many other things that are fit in the same field, but this basically is the core components, what we call honeypot technology. In the last couple of years, so about 2 or 3, maybe 4 years, there was a couple of commercial companies popping up and picking up this whole idea of deception technologies. This is actually quite interesting. I mean, there was no real indicator why all of a sudden this became interesting. Why is this like a new technology? Why is this something we can sell all of a sudden? The way how they do this is quite similar to what we did in the last couple of 10, 20 years, but it basically takes the technology that we developed, it takes the ideas that we developed into a more enterprise solution, something you can actually deploy in a system and that does not scare the shit out of you, that does not scare the shit out of your IT department. And actually Gartner proposed, I think 2 years back, that by 2018, next year, by 2018, 10% of all bigger companies, I keep it as bigger companies, but all of the bigger companies are going to use deception technology. I don't think we're there yet, but I'm pretty sure this is a trend that we see keeping evolve. So, but it is not just US end users, it's not just companies being affected by the threat out there. So I want to also put this in perspective of industrial systems. So I built an industrial honeypot to understand a little bit, okay, what's the threat if your factory is exposed? What's the threat if your factory, your robot is on a public IP address? And it's actually quite interesting. It's a completely different kind of mindset of the people working in this field. They're not too much concerned about security, actually. I mean, they're concerned about security, but it's not their highest priority. Their highest priority is the system needs to run. If a factory is down for an hour, it is extremely expensive. Factory has to run. And this goes as far as they refuse to patch systems. They refuse to update systems. If something runs, you don't touch it. Even if it's completely broken. Windows XP is nothing new in those fields. Like, they're still running Windows XP because it runs. There's no problem with that. They don't let you patch it. They don't let you penetration test your system. They don't let you poke around and see, okay, how are things connected? Are we having stuff on the public internet? It does not matter. Important is the system runs. It is slightly changing these days. They understand, okay, if I get DDoS, if my PLC gets DDoS, it goes down, it's bad, so I have to protect it. But it's a different mindset. Another point of view that comes up with industrial system and also with what we call connected things, IoT, is it is actually kind of different what we have to protect. I mean, if you protect a fridge, what are the functions of a fridge? It's freezing, it's heating, maybe, or not freezing. That's all the only two things a fridge can do, maybe lights on, lights off. So the attack surface is actually really, really small. The same with PLCs, industrial systems, the attack surface is really, really small. So they're actually quite easy to protect. It's not the big issue that we have seen with a whole computer with a browser and rendering and parsing of files, and that's extremely complicated. It's extremely complicated to protect an endpoint, a computer, a desktop. But it's actually not that complicated to protect a PLC, because the things a PLC is supposed to do is very narrow. It's opening a valve, closing a valve. Light on, light off. Very simple. If you ensure that this is secure, if that's the only thing that the PLCs can do, then you have basically narrowed down your problem to a really, really small thing. So why we say it's really, really bad that all of things are connected, that my toaster is on the internet, it is actually not that big of an issue because we can protect them properly if we do so. So we also have set up a couple of honeypots for IoT devices. So we wanted to see, okay, let's say I put my toaster on the network. Is anyone interested in the toaster? And it turns out, yes, there's some interest in toasters, but the things they do is mostly, well, they find the toaster and they say, okay, there's a toaster, but there's nothing they can do with the toaster because it's a toaster. So it is still an interesting field, and we have seen a lot of attacks going on using toasters. I mean, you can take over the toasters, you can make an army of toasters and host other companies and other people. So it is still bad, and still bad things happening, but it's something that is interesting at the same time. So what else has changed? We have started to understand things, and we got confirmation of things that we have feared and kind of assumed for a long time. I mean, you have seen Shadow Broker, you have seen the revelation of Snowden. It basically gave us the information that we kind of assumed already, and we started to understand what the bad guys are up to a bit more. But at the same time, people were using those techniques. So you've probably heard about WannaCry, the big outreach of people getting infected by the crypto locker, being affected by this SMB vulnerability leaked in the shadow broker. And actually, we found those samples in our honeypots. We got infected by WannaCry. We have seen it happening. And maybe we were a bit late, but I think we got the information and we managed to shut down the problem fairly fast, so it didn't have the catastrophic outbreak that people were saying it's going to have. It is basically, yeah, the battlefield has slightly changed in the last couple of years. It has become a bit more interesting, actually. Because back in the days when I started, it was mostly script kiddies trying to break into my website, defacing my website. Who's doing defacing these days anymore? It's not a big thing anymore. It might be somewhere politically motivated people doing defacing, but it's not happening anymore. What's happening these days is actually people trying to break into critical systems. People trying to break industrial systems, which is kind of a bigger deal. They have different goals, different intentions. They want to break things, they want to harm people, literally. There was a honeypot that was implementing a train system. And it took a couple of hours until someone derailed the train. Not physically, but the virtual train was derailed. And the system was built in a way so that people could tell, so I actually just derailed the train. So either they understood this is a virtual train, this is a honeypot, so they have figured out, okay, this is just made up and I have a laugh of this train derailing, or they just accepted the fact that they just derailed the train. Which is kind of things get scary. I mean, people are dying all of a sudden. Cyber was all fun and hacking each other, defacing, IRC, bots, whatnot. But now people are actually affected. We have power outages from power plants being shut down, being broken into. That has a big effect on people. People are losing money these days. So the game is changing. And so is how we have to collect data, how we have to defend ourselves. We cannot rely on just AV anymore. We have to muscle up a bit. And this is where, for the Honeynet Project, deception has a really good place. Because it allows you to understand the bad guys. You don't have to wait for shadow broker to release information about how the governments are hacking each other. You can actually fight back before get someone leaking information. So the threat model has changed. And with the threat model changing, we also have to adapt. And this is just, it's something everyone has to be aware of. You have to change your viewpoint. You cannot just look at this one firewall, this one intrusion detection system, and your AV. This is not enough anymore. You have to change the way how you protect. You have to adjust your viewpoint. And this is actually something we keep praying since the last 20 years. If you don't understand what's happening, if you don't understand your adversary, you protect against the wrong things, and you are probably having people inside your network for ages already. The average detection time of someone breaking into someone else's system is around 18 months these days, maybe 12 months. There's someone in your system for a year, and this is just, it's ridiculous. I mean, someone for a year in your system can do anything. And this is average time. There are companies out there breached for years without knowing it. So, I promised to also talk about the future. And I'm going to talk about the future from a research point of view. So for us, future means we want to keep understanding the bad guys. That means we have to stand on our toes. We cannot just sit back and say, okay, here's my honeypot, I'll wait for the bad guys to come. We also have to change our way of detecting people, how to understand them, how to kind of see their motives, see what they're looking for. So the Honeynet Project is quite involved in working together with students, with universities. We try to help people understand and grow as a community. So one of our main goals is working together with other people, with like-minded people. So if you're sitting in this room and you're thinking, this sounds really interesting, then we all hope that you reach out to us and collaborate with us. We have information, we like sharing data, we like working together with other people. So what does it mean to go into the future? There's things out there like machine learning, which is extremely fancy, extremely powerful if applied properly. But are we ready? Are we ready to let machines decide how we protect against bad guys. Might be. I'm pretty sure this is going to happen in one or the other way. If you consider how much information comes into your system every day, how often your seeing goes, oh my God, I've seen a lot of really bad things, and you have to filter down and decide, okay, which is actually important for me. There's a lot of information, and a lot of information usually means you have to filter, you have to prioritize, you have to make sure that you look at the right things. This is where machine learning comes in. This is where you can use technology, where you can use the power of something that's trained on something that is considered malicious, filter your the threat down to the things that are important. So one of the solutions for security problems was throwing more people at it, or throwing more money at it. But I think what we have to throw at it is actually technology. It is smart things. It's understanding things. And the only way to understand things, again, looping back to the honeypots, is if you understand your enemies. So yes, you can just create machine learning. Use this magic black box that tells you if something is bad or not. But most important is you have to understand things. So as long as we are curious about what's happening out there, as long as we're not sitting back and just hoping that this being compliant with all the regulations is enough, as long as we keep pushing, as long as we keep fighting back and making it difficult for the bad guys to get into our systems, I think we're on the right track. The same goes for the Honeynet Project. We keep pushing. We keep trying to find new ways to understand the bad guys. With that, I'm done. Thank you for listening to me, and I hope there are at least a couple of questions. So, just as a introduction, as a primer for questions, I built a lot of honeypots. I deploy a lot of honeypots. So, if you're interested in also technology and what it means to setting up honeypots, feel free to ask questions.
Don't rush us if you have a question.
Yes.
So one of the interesting challenges that exist as you're building honeypots is making sure people can't break out of them and then actually go mess with your production system. So with simple stuff like cowrie and Kippo, I know that was an issue for a while, but how do you go and protect the honeypots against the rest of your production?
So usually, there are multiple ways how to set up honeypot, right? You can set up the honeypot on your external perimeter, so it's outside, can be seen from the outside. It can be inside your DMC, it can be inside your production network. Basically, there's very little you can, honeypot differs from any other system. I mean, it has sometimes this potential of a bait, so luring someone in, it attracts bad guys. But usually, the more enterprisey honeypot solutions, they are not like screaming and shouting, hey, I'm vulnerable, attack me. So they are just another computer in your system. So there's not a big difference from that point of view. And on the other side, they also look at software. So they're equally vulnerable as any other software on your computer. And considering that most of the honeypots are developed by security experts, I'm sticking out my hand a bit here, but I would say they're more secure. We can discuss about this if they're actually more secure or not, but at the same time, if a honeypot gets hit, this is actually the bigger story here is, if a honeypot gets actually hit, so if someone inside, so you're talking about someone breaking out of the honeypot, but if someone touches the honeypot, that's inside the honeypot, then your alert should already go off. And you should isolate this box or put it on a separate network, or someone should investigate right away. Because a honeypot is only touched by a bad guy. Which is probably not always true, but this is the general assumption we are doing. Because a honeypot is not a production system, it only sits there for the sole purpose of being found by a bad guy.
First time to Australia? Was it for you? Is this your first time to leave Australia?
Yes, first time.
Right. Not that far, is it?
Sorry?
Not that far, is it?
It's some 20 hours.
It sounds like a normal Australian commute to me. I live in Sydney, so traffic.
Hello.
Hi.
How do you go about simulating a system such as a train system, which you probably don't know what it actually looks like in real life?
Yeah, so the train system was done by AV company, as like a promotion project, so I was not involved in that, but I got some good insights on how they built the system. So they actually went for a hybrid approach. So some of the parts were actually physical devices. So all the control systems were actually PLCs sitting there controlling a model train. So it was a physical model train driving on a track on a regular schedule. There was a website with the where you could buy tickets for the train. There was actually a camera, CCTV camera, in the station where people boarded the train and exited the train. So it was extremely elaborate. They spent more than a year building this whole train system, which was completely fake, completely made up. But it had a couple of vulnerabilities. It was out there. Obviously, the website was out there. People could access the website. And then the website was used as an entry point into their backend, into their internal network, where you could start messing around with the PLCs. And they had, I think they had like a SCADA interface for the train track, so you could see where the train was. You can see there was a dead end in the train. Basically what the ethicals did, they changed one of the tracks to go into the dead end, so they switched the train tracks, and the train went full speed into the dead end. And that's when they considered the train to be derailed. Actually, the model train actually derailed.
I was intrigued that you mentioned the derailment of the train. When you had the toaster on there, was no one tempted to just turn the heater on and leave it on?
Sorry, come again?
You mentioned the derailment of the train.
Yeah.
But with the toaster, was no one tempting to turn the heater on and just leave it on?
So if I remember correctly, for the toaster, they were basically like I don't think they actually understood it was a toaster. But they were just wriggling everything. Like the toaster would basically was going crazy. I don't know if an actual toaster would have broken from someone like heating and not heating like in a high frequency. But I think the toaster would have been fine.
Question just up here in the middle. For our core event staff, this is part of the fitness plan. We get them running up and down the stairs all day.
Hey, how you doing? You've been talking about using honeypots as a deception mechanism so that we can essentially deceive the attackers, right? But we see attackers, like you take the case of Bad Rabbit, right? Where the attackers are trying to deceive us by launching what looks like a realistic attack to, I guess, distract our security operations staff to get us looking over here when we're actually doing something over there. Do you see a time and a place for honeypots and other honey things being used to try and determine when an attack is actually really trying to attack your infrastructure and when it's just them trying to fake you out?
Yes. So the question was if you can use a honeypot to determine if an attack is actually really targeted or just random noise or a distraction. I think, the things about honeypot is that, as I said earlier, the honeypot is something that is not supposed to be touched by anyone. So if you put a honeypot in a place where you consider only critical things are, it could be a more high value trigger for an event. So if anyone gets into the system and touches the honeypot, you can trigger an event. I think the leveled approach that you have multiple levels of critical honeypot. So this honeypot is on the parameter. I expect there to be noise, but this honeypot is in the DMC. I expect whatever hits this honeypot should have a higher priority. And this honeypot is down in my production system next to my most critical infrastructure. This should get always the highest priority. I think that might be something to distinguish between just the random noise, just the things that are out there on the internet all the time, versus someone actually trying to break into the more critical parts of infrastructure.
Right. We might stop it there because you can bail him up at the break. First of all, so thank you, Lucas, for that.